Okay, another minute or so. Okay, let's get started. Chapter 5. Well, this one had quite a bit to it. And we've got a lot to get through because I wound up grabbing a bunch of the text and I still had to skip a ton of it. Um, and there are so many concepts I want to talk about that some of them we'll save for the final session, the sort of cleaning up session. Um, but this picture of entropy is getting clearer. I mean, I've been thinking about it a lot lately, just, offhandedly and when my mind wanders. um, I haven't delved completely into, uh, there are like proofs, for these ideas of entropy, but the information entropy one, if you Google that, communication entropy, you wind up uh, finding out stuff about, uh, hi there, about data being transmitted. And that's not what he's getting at, I don't think. Well, more on that. I don't want to skip ahead too much. Have you guys, by chance, Googled communication entropy? Yeah, like I said, it looks like nowadays that's mostly concerned with the idea of a perfect transmission of data because you have sort of like a source of the data and then there's a conduit and then there's the final location of the data. But that I don't think is, or maybe it could even be what we're kind of getting at in here. But if you guys are maybe confused about entropy of communication, let me give you the simple example. Um, do you know the telephone game? The telephone game is that game you play when you're kids, or maybe later on, where somebody gives whispers the message into someone's ear, and that person whispers it to the next one, and so on and so on. And then by the end, there's there's been a lot of entropy. The final message is a lot different from the beginning one. So I guess that's kind of a simple version of communications entropy because something always gets misplaced. And there's this other thing we're going to talk about that I can't for the life of me remember where I got it from. I'm pretty sure it's from this guy called Robert Anton Wilson in his discussions of general semantics. Um, but to put it, okay, this is something to think about. There are several layers to it. It starts off this way. Uh, what you see in the world is not what happens in very important ways because, for example, you can't see everything. Really, you are surrounded right now by, you know, all kinds of signals that are just flying past you in the form of, you know, sound that you can't even hear, that's on a scale that you can't even hear, and light that you can't see. Not to mention, you can only see the side of thing that you're facing, and on and on and on. What you see is not what happened. That's the first layer. The second layer is what you say. Oh no, what you remember is not even what you saw because your memory is not perfect. Things get lost in that translation, right? Um, I think we can all understand that one easily enough. Then what you say is not even what you remember because your language doesn't fit perfectly onto it, right? And then the next layer is what is heard is not what you said because people don't perfectly have your exact definitions. People don't possess your subjectivity, right? So your language isn't an exact translation from person to person. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's okay.
Um, and yeah, did I say the last one is like what you said is not even what is heard? Yeah, yeah. Okay. So all of that, and yet everything works, right? So that's what to think about. And we'll talk more about that, but I've been thinking about it a lot. And I can't find the original formulation of that thing. I'm pretty sure, like I said, it's this guy, Robert Anton Wilson. Um, but there are just, layers and layers of entropy, and yet everything kind of works out in the end. Um, okay, let's start. So, welcome once again. Oops, I didn't change that to chapter 5. It still says chapter 3. Ignore the 3. So there's some entropy going on. um, what you type is not even what you were thinking. Or what you forget to type is blah, blah, blah. Anyway. So,
Sorry, but
yes,
we passed the part, chapter 3. What is?
yes. I was just joking because I
Okay, okay,
forgot
okay.
to change no, I forgot to change the
Mm.
3 on that slide. Because look, whenever I start this out, I just use the same slide and change the number for that one slide. You'll pardon me for not making the slide from scratch each time.
It was entropy.
Sorry?
It was entropy.
Yes, exactly. It didn't work out. My exact copy was not an exact. Actually, it was an exact copy. That's the problem. Okay. So we start off with Oedipa heading for Berkely to find out about the courier's tragedy lines. She's going to make sense of this if it's the last thing she ever does. She goes to the publisher. The clerk says, "Oh no, sorry. This is first at her hotel. She gets a hotel. Um, in the room, there's a reproduction of that painting. So there's always this reminder that she might be creating the world that she experiences, right? Remember the painting with the women who are weaving the world into existence from their tower. It doesn't say it's exactly that painting, but that's the same painter. Um, so yeah, through corridors gently curving as the streets of San Narciso utterly silent, she falls asleep quickly, waking from a nightmare about something in the mirror across from her bed. Nothing specific, only a possibility. Nothing she could see. When she finally did sleep, she dreamt that Mucho was making love to her on a soft white beach. When she woke in the morning, she was sitting bolt upright, staring into the mirror at her own exhausted face. Um, there's a lot we could think about there. I mean, it seems that she was, I don't know, making love to herself, something like that. There's the mirror and then the dream, and then she wakes up seeing her own face, something like that. That's she's the Narcissus in that the making love to a reflection. That would be Narcissus, right? That's at least how that struck me. Oh, by the way, when she checks into the hotel, there's a convention of deaf mute folks there. And it's funny because she goes to the hotel and then the receptionist starts doing sign language at her. And she says, it says that she considered showing her middle finger, but she was too tired, which is a really strange reason to not be rude like that. I was going to show my middle finger, but I was exhausted. So she goes to the room to go to sleep. She finds an older version of the play at the publishers. She goes to the publisher and they direct her to this older copy of the play. So the line, well, she doesn't get any good explanation. The line in the older version says, "No hallowed skein of stars can ward, I trow, who once has crossed the lusts of Angelo." So it doesn't even say Tristero. By the way, that would be who's once been set his tryst with Tristero instead of has crossed the lusts of Angelo. So the Tristero doesn't even appear in that line. So she's like, oh, great. This is not giving me any explanation, any clarity. But there is some writing in the footnotes that mentions Tristero, but nothing that really helps her. One of the footnotes, one part of the footnotes, I didn't print everything here because they were extensive. The doubtful Whitechapel version has "this tryst or odious awry o Nicolo." That's the line in that one, but that's a doubtful one. And the footnote, though, suggests that this may be a pun for this Tristero dies irae, the day of wrath. So Tristero does get mentioned, but only in the footnotes. So now she's like, oh, great, this is not helping me at all. I didn't find what I was looking for. So it's a dead end. And yes, it's really a detective novel. You know what else I was thinking about reading this? Because at some point in this chapter, she decides that she's going to investigate by just drifting through the city at random. It kind of reminds me of the Big Lebowski. Have you guys seen The Big Lebowski, the movie? The Big Lebowski is also a kind of detective story in a way, except the detective is a total like lazy. He seemed like a loser. He doesn't put any energy into what he does. He just kind of drifts through the investigation, kind of like this, right? He just wanders through and stumbles into things, Mr. Magoo style. Was it Mr. Magoo who? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? First of all, Mr. Magoo, the old cartoon. No. There was a cartoon, an old cartoon with the guy who couldn't see, and so he would always wander through all these dangerous situations, and he'd always bend over at just the right time so the thing didn't hit him. And the gimmick in the cartoon when there's a construction site and then there's a metal beam coming up and the person walks and he walks across the metal beam and then onto the other side safely. That was Mr. Magoo. He was always, half blind, but successfully making it through every situation. Anyway, I'm sidetracking too much with Mr. Magoo. It's this just sort of wandering character that winds up succeeding without really doing much except for, I mean, she is determined to succeed, but she puts in more effort than Mr. Magoo, that's for sure. Anyway, so she wonders where the Tristero line comes from. Was it in another edition besides the Quarto, the Folio, and Whitechapel versions? The editor's preface signed this time by Emery Bortz, professor of English at Cal. Okay, so she has another lead. She can go find Professor Bortz. Yes, Vasilia.
You mentioned Mr. Magoo and someone else, some film.
The Big Lebowski. The Big Lebowski is a Coen Brothers movie, and if you haven't seen it, I'd recommend it. It's very funny. Coen Brothers movies are generally very good. I would say without exception. Without exception, yeah. But yeah, it's also a kind of a detective story, but not really. He's not a detective. He's like this California guy who's always like dressed in his bathrobe. I mean, he's like complete slob. Let's say it that way. And he talks like the stereotype of a laid-back California person. Like, hey, man, that's your opinion, man. And he's a detective in the story. Accidental detective, I guess that's it. So at Berkeley, of course, Oedipa finds that Bortz is not there anymore. Bortz does not teach at Berkeley, but in fact teaches now at San Narciso. So she says, oh, of course, I go to the wrong place and I could have stayed in San Narciso and found this Professor Bortz. She feels alien as she walks through the Berkeley campus. So Berkeley at this time, of course, is really the center of activism in the US. I didn't put all the descriptions, but she hears all different languages being spoken alongside English as she walks across the campus. She remembers how different it was for her generation that was sort of terrified. And she said that they were raised on nerve, something like that, on nerves, not nerve. She says this Berkeley was like no somnolent Siwash. Siwash is a Northwestern native person, but that word here is slang for like a small college. So this Berkeley was like no somnolent is like sleepy. Sleepy little college out of her own past at all, but more like those Far Eastern or Latin American universities you read about, autonomous culture media where the most beloved folklores may be brought into doubt. So she's talking about, it's an intellectual environment in which everything is questioned. Cataclysmic of dissents voiced, suicidal of commitments chosen, the sort that bring governments down. Picture from Berkeley in 1969. Those acronyms that she mentions, one of them is this free speech movement here, this big free speech megaphone. Do you remember when she mentions 3 acronyms, like the FYM and the, one of them is like the student freedom of speech movement, something like that. So this would be the kind of campus she would be walking through in this scene. While she's in Berkeley, she goes to meet Dr. Nefastus. If you recall, he's the inventor of the machine that is supposed to reverse entropy with the Maxwell's demon. She meets him. She wants to see whether she's a sensitive, a person who can operate the machine. He begins discussing entropy with her. She gathered there were 2 distinct kinds of entropy, one having to do with heat engines. So that one is just basically that you can't have perpetual motion, right? As energy is transmitted, some is lost, which is why, the patent offices, they'll accept patents for anything, but there's a rule now where patent offices, at least in the US, will not accept any more patents for perpetual motion machines. They have been deemed officially impossible because over the years, so many people have tried to patent perpetual motion machine. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? People have long had the dream that they could have the perpetual motion machine, right? And that would be the solution to all energy crises. So yeah, they've stopped accepting those. Oh, the line is doubled here for some reason. Okay, so one having to do with heat engines, the other to do with communication. That's the one we were kind of talking about. The equation for one back in the 30s had looked very like the equation for the other. It was a coincidence. The 2 fields were totally unconnected, except at one point, Maxwell's demon. So the Maxwell's demon is the thing that they hold in common or could theoretically hold in common. I haven't fully been able to think this through because it's bothering me a little bit. So I've been thinking about it a lot because the Maxwell's demon, I kind of get the idea, if you remember, that Maxwell's demon reverses entropy by allowing all of the higher energy particles into one cylinder and the lower energy particles into another. or keeping them separated, because entropy says that they would eventually just kind of even out and spread evenly throughout a space. That kind of makes sense, where he's like, letting them, he said letting them, so there's a lot of confusion there. He's categorizing them, he's sorting them, and that's an action, and that's how Oedipa responds to that, but isn't sorting an action. Now, I'm a little more confused, though, about how Maxwell's demon would function for communication entropy. I really haven't figured it out yet. I mean, I guess we're supposed to understand it from this, though. When Oedipus said, isn't sorting an activity, that's what they're talking about here in this last line on this page. Somehow the loss of entropy would be the maintaining of order, or like the keeping separated of those particles. It was offset by the information the demon gained about the molecules. I'm kind of starting to get it a little bit, but I really haven't totally figured it out. I have to think about it some more. In other words, the demon, in order to do the sorting process, has to know, quote unquote, know, and sort of register, let's say register all of the molecules' locations. And that's the exchange. I don't know. I have to think about it more. Does anybody else have anything to contribute? Help me.
No.
It's mind-boggling. I have to really think about it. Every time I think about it for long enough, my brain starts to itch. Okay. Oops, I guess I should have added more to this slide. The demon collects data on each and every one. Yeah, that's the exchange, right? That's the information. In the end, Oedipa cannot use the device. So I think that says a lot about what's happening. She can't stop entropy, basically. She can't stop things from becoming diffuse, and she can't stop entropy, basically. She can't get through. Like, she can't figure out what's going on. Is another way of talking about what's happening here, right? She stares at the picture of Maxwell, waiting to see one of those cylinders move, and it doesn't work out. Eventually, she gives up. She cries out, "I'm sorry." He comes in and puts his arm around her shoulder. She tries to sleep with her. All the guys try to sleep with her in the story whenever they meet her. And she says, "Gah." Literally, that's her line, "Gah." And she runs away. He's very matter of fact, too. Right after they're finished, he's like, "Well, we can go into the living room now." And she's like, "No." So that's our Nephastus. She decides to drift. Now, I mentioned in one of the earlier sessions the idea of the drift, the derivé from situationalism. It's the idea of drifting through the city and seeing where it takes you. It's kind of I don't know, like a Zen behavior. It has to do with following aesthetic cues, right? You see things in the city, some things attract you, some things repel you. You move towards the things that attract you naturally. And you wind up with a kind of psychic map of the city that has to do with aesthetic impressions rather than a real, quote unquote, real map. Anyway, that's not exactly what she's doing, but she does decide to drift. That's her diagnosis. She says to herself, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to drift through San Francisco just to show myself that it's all in my head," right? She says, "Here in San Francisco, away from all the tangible assets of that estate," remember that would be Pierce's estate, "there might still be a chance of getting the whole thing to go away." She thinks, "I'm out of San Narciso, so I'm not going to see that damned horn everywhere," right? That's what she's worried about. Here in San Francisco, I'll see that it's all in my head. So she's, She had only to drift tonight at random and watch nothing happen and be convinced it was purely nervous, a little something for her shrink to fix. Shrink is slang for your psychotherapist, like psychiatrist. It's actually short for head shrinker because the therapist is supposed to shrink your head in a manner of speaking. I guess shrink your ego. Otherwise, you'll have a big head. So yeah. Well, it took no more than an hour for her to see one of the horns. So it doesn't work out. As soon as she starts drifting, she starts running into the horn everywhere, even more than usual. It's like she's getting attacked by it. She winds up at a gay bar that's being visited by tourists. There's a tour guide taking people into the gay bar. So she winds up talking to the tour guide because she sees that he has a pin with the horn, right? And so she starts trying to work him. Actually, I didn't put it up here, but the first thing I think she says to him is, I just use the regular post like any normal person because I never knew any better. And he's like, what are you talking about? And it's really funny because you picture a crazy person saying something like that. You know, imagine someone walking up to you in the street and saying, I just use the normal post because I wasn't raised to know anything different. You would be like, okay. And that's kind of the impression you get. You can see how she could be viewed as a little bit wacky. So they both have some drinks and she decides to just tell him everything, right? About her whole situation, even though he's a complete stranger. And he actually has sympathy with her. And he says, you know what? I'll tell you what I know. The pin I'm wearing means I'm a member of the IA. That's the Innamorati Anonymous. And innamorati is somebody in love. That's the worst addiction of all. Somebody is about to fall in love, she says. You go sit with them or something. And he's like, yeah, pretty much. So he's part of an organization, not the waste organization, or he's lying, that is there to stop people from falling in love. So how does the horn symbol, how does he wind up with the horn symbol? Well, he tells the story of how that happened. Their founder, who's anonymous, is replaced at his job by an IBM 7094. You know, this is back in the big computer days. I looked up this computer, this beast, and it has RAM in the like kilobytes, which is funny to think of now. So their founder was replaced by a computer, and he was considering ending his own life. So he puts a personal ad to ask people for reasons not to kill himself, right? And he doesn't get any responses at first. This is the founder of the IA, by the way, just to reiterate. Eventually, he gets responses, but through the waste system, which he didn't know about before, right? A sort of homeless looking fellow shows up at his door with a hook hand and tosses a bunch of letters at him. And he says, okay, that's weird. And then it turns out that the letters that he gets are actually not telling him not to do it. They're pretty much telling him that there's no real good reason to continue living. It's funny if you think about what the waste system must be, because one of the injunctions is to think about how any improper messages should be reported in the regular mail system. And the waste system is kind of there for people to say like horrible things or something like that, like things that the government might hear or things that might be illegal, or things that might be just, I don't know, immoral or in poor taste or something like that. Because he gets letters through the waste system that are saying, yeah, you know, if you can't hack it, then there's nothing wrong with just taking the easy. He figured he would get people telling him not to do it, you know, but that didn't happen. One day he notices A front page story in the Times, complete with the picture of the Buddhist monk in Vietnam who self-immolated, set himself on fire to protest government policies. Groovy, he cried. So he says, that's the ticket. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm sure you're all familiar with that picture. I did not put it here. I figured it might be something we'd have to have a content warning for. So he goes to his house. His wife has left him already, but before he can follow through, he catches his wife more or less in flagrante delicto with an efficiency expert. The efficiency expert and his wife are about to sleep together. Actually, they start. But then they say, hey, we smell gasoline, because he has doused himself in gasoline. He's about to light himself on fire. The efficiency expert makes fun of him. Nearly 3 weeks it takes him to decide, to kill himself. You know how long it would have taken the computer? 12 microseconds. This is like dark humor, right? The computer would have decided to kill itself really quickly. No wonder you were replaced. So he sees this as a sign because he looks at the stamps on the letters and they have been sort of bleached by the gasoline. And on the back of the stamps, he sees the horn symbol. And he says, a sign. That's it. If I'd been a religious man, if he'd been a religious man, he would have fallen to his knees. He says to himself, my big mistake was love. From this day, I swear to stay off of love. Hetero, homo, bi, dog, cat, or every kind there is. I will found a society of isolates dedicated to this purpose. So maybe this guy is being honest, the guy who says, no, I'm part of the IA. And it's just a coincidence that they use that sign because of this whole founding story of the IA. So in any case, that means that she doesn't get any clarity. Again, she's still drifting, looking for something to make sense of everything. She continues to wander the city. The next thing she sees on a sidewalk are 2 of the horns written in chalk, 20 feet apart. Between them, a complicated array of boxes, 2 of them in chalk. Sorry. Again, I have a double line. Some of them with letters, some with numbers. A kid's game? She comes to Golden Gate Park and she finds a circle of children in their night clothes who are told her they were dreaming the gathering. Okay, this is real Alice in Wonderland sort of business, right? I mean, she's wandering through a dream, really, isn't she? I don't know. Does anybody have anything to say about this? It seems very not real. In fact, when she meets these children, they even tell her that they're not really there. They are dreaming the gathering. They're gathering together in their dreams, so they're not really there. So this is all a very dream-like sequence of events. It says, but the dream was really no different from being awake. Because in the mornings when they got up, they felt tired as if they'd been up most of the night. So they're awake, but dreaming. They're there, but they're not there. They know about the post horn, but they don't know anything about that game that she saw written on the sidewalk. You used only one image and it was jump rope game, the little girl explained. So she explains the jump rope game. You step alternately in the loop, the bell, and the mute while your girlfriend sang, Tristo, Tristo, 1, 2, 3, turning taxi from across the sea. Wow, okay. Thurn and Taxis, you mean? They'd never heard of it that way. So even these dream children know something about Tristo and Thurn and Taxis, perhaps. They went on warming their hands at an invisible fire. Oedipa, to retaliate, stopped believing in them. See what I mean? This is, it's very much, it's like a dream, right? Doesn't seem to be really happening. Anybody have anything they'd like to add to this? Okay. She finds a familiar face in the form of one Jesus Arabal. So Jesus is somebody that she met on that trip to Mexico with Pierce all those years ago. And she runs into him at random in San Francisco. He's sitting in a corner under a TV set, idly stirring his soup with the foot of a chicken. Also funny. He's using a chicken's foot to stir the soup. He greets Oedipa. You are the lady in Mazatlan. He remembers her. He remembers her, a tourist from years ago in Mexico. You remember everything. Oedipa said, Jesus, even tourists. That's funny because it could also be an exclamation like, Jesus, even tourists. Jesus, even tourists, you remember. How is your CIA? And of course, your first thought is, well, the CIA. But no, it's not the CIA. It stands for the Conjuración de los Insurgentes Anarquistas. It's an anarchist group called the CIA. So a complete reversal of your expectations, right? You're expecting the CIA, but you get anarchists. Traceable back to the time of the Flores Magón brothers, who are pictured here. I was just listening, I don't know, I guess maybe last year to the Revolutions podcast, and there's a whole series on the Mexican revolutions. So I remember these guys. There's also a stand-up comedian in New York who's related to them. His name is Jake Flores. The Flores Magón brothers. They briefly allied with Zapata. Okay. Anarchists, by the way. Interesting. Anarchy keeps coming up. Anarchy came up before in reference to that the old Toth, the aging Toth watching cartoons and watching the episode of Porky Pig that has the anarchist. Anarchy will make an appearance again here shortly. They think back to that time that they hung out together in Mexico. Pierce, because of his neutral manners, when in the presence of ill will, had nothing to tell Arabal. He played the rich, obnoxious gringo so perfectly that Oedipa had seen gooseflesh come up along the anarchist's forearms. So his hairs were standing up on his arm because he was so not a fan of Pierce. Due to no Pacific sea breeze, in other words, it's because of Pierce. Soon as Pierce went off to sport in the surf, Arabal asked her if she was real or a spy or making fun of him. He can't believe that somebody who is so diametrically the opposite of him, namely Pierce, not her, has come into such close proximity to him. So he's also getting paranoid. But that's a memory. That's a memory of Mexico in which he was getting paranoid. He says, you know what a miracle is? Not what Bakunin said, but another world's intrusion into this one. That's his definition of a miracle. When worlds collide, it's like one world comes into another world. Most of the time we coexist peacefully, but when we do touch, there's cataclysm. Like the church we hate, anarchists also believe in another world. So he's kind of giving an anti-version of the, let's say, something like a heaven or an ideal miraculous world, where revolutions break out spontaneous and leaderless, and the soul's talent for consensus allows the masses to work together without effort, automatic as the body itself. And yet, Senya, if any of it should ever really happen that perfectly, I would also have to cry miracle. So he seems to be acknowledging that anarchism would not work out with no organizing principle. He seems to believe, or at least hope for the miracle of spontaneous order, spontaneous organization, which will make an appearance again also in this chapter. Anybody have anything to add to that? Okay. Oedipus sees numerous other horns. She even sees one on, she sees a gang, and the gang, they have the horn on their jackets. She sees on the bus, she's riding the bus, and she sees a horn drawn onto the back of the seat in front of her. So she can't get away from them. It's like she's being mobbed by the horns. At the airport, she overhears people discussing the waste system. She hears a boy who planned to slip at night into aquariums to open negotiations with the dolphins because the dolphins would succeed, man. Kissing his mother with the tongue. He says, "I'll write, Ma." She says, "Write by waste. Remember, the government will open it if you use the other. The dolphins will be mad." "I love you, Ma," he said. "Love the dolphins," she advises. "Write by waste." So, see, waste seems to be a way of communicating secretly to say things that might be illegal or just despicable in general. So, whereas once she had hoped to have the city talk her out of all this, that's not what happens. Finally, she stumbles upon a distressed old man. He has a horn on his hand, so another horn. He's clearly upset. He's covering his face with his hands. She says, "Can I help?" He says, "My wife's in Fresno. I left her so long ago, I don't remember. Now this is for her." So he gives her a letter. It looks old. The letter looks like he's been carrying it for years. "Drop it in the, and he holds up the tattoo. Right? "I can't go out there. It's too far now. I had a bad night." So she sees this as perhaps her chance. Notice how whenever she has the opportunity, she's quite good at slipping into the moment and being kind of clever, except when she misreads the situation, as she did with the tour guide, where she immediately starts trying to defend the fact that she uses the normal post. But she often just starts working the person for information. So she now sees, hey, this is an opportunity for me to find one of the post boxes so I can see what it's like. I can maybe learn something. So she goes along with this. Another voice pops out from behind her. "Is that him?" Up the stairs. "The sailor?" See, she cleverly, because she doesn't know, just says, "He has a tattoo on his hand." As if that would be, "Hey, yeah, this is the guy," or "No, this is not the guy." It could be either one, right? He says, "Can you bring him up?" "Okay, that's him." So this guy is waiting to see the other guy, who we're going to be calling the arthritic, I think, in this little scene. She sees an older man wearing a tall Homburg hat, smiling at them. "I'd help, but I got a little arthritis." "Does he have to come up?" she said. "Up there." She helps him upstairs, and she realizes, she brings him to this room that has like a picture of a saint and a little mattress, and she realizes that she's brought him there to die. That's what he's going to do. It's not clear exactly in what way that's going to transpire. If this is some kind of arrangement. It's a little bit surreal because it seems to be something organized. She says he's going to die, and the guy says, "Yeah, but aren't we all?" She feels very sort of protective about the sailor. And there's some use of puns here. She knew that the sailor had seen worlds no other man had seen, if only because there was that high magic to low puns. Because DTs, now DTs are, maybe you've heard the term delirium tremens. The man is an alcoholic, as she learns when she gives $10 to the other guy. And no, she gives it to the sailor and he says, I'll just spend it on drink. Now, DTs, that stands for delirium tremens. Delirium tremens is the shaking that an alcoholic experiences when they're withdrawing from alcohol use. So that's the term DT, delirium tremens, basically tremors, right? But there's another DT. The DTs must give access to DTs. Now that DT, we learn from her memory of her college boyfriend, is from calculus. And that DT is differential. That's that DT. So there's something going on here that, again, I haven't totally grasped. His delirium tremens must give access to the differentials of spectra beyond the known sun, music made purely of Antarctic loneliness and fright. Basically, he has, because of his lifestyle as a sailor, an extremely different view of the world, a unique view, as anyone would have, really. One does not have to be a sailor. But nothing she knew of would preserve them or him. She gave him goodbye. That's a very old way of saying that. Walked downstairs and then on in the direction he'd told her. So she leaves him there. Eventually, she finds the trash can that is the post box. The post box is a trash can. And it makes sense that it would say waste on it, and people would not think about that because that's what a trash can would say, would say waste. Another detail that I didn't put up here is that the can is located under the freeway, I think they said, like under the highway. So under an overpass. That just adds to the image, like that this is underground, right? All of this is happening underneath the real city. She looked closely to see the periods between the letters. So she puts the letter in, and then she decides to put on her detective hat, not literally, and see what happens next. So she settles back in the shadow of a column. She may have dozed off. I was thinking about that line for a couple minutes. Maybe this is the end of the dream. When she dozed off and woke up. I don't know. Maybe it's the beginning. She woke up to see a kid dropping a bundle of letters into the can. She went over and dropped in the sailor's letter to Fresno. Okay, that's where she does that. And hid again and waited. Toward midday, a rangy young wino. A wino is a street alcoholic. So these appear to be run by like homeless folks. A rangy young wino showed up with a sack, unlocked a panel at the side of the box, and took out all the letters. Oedipa gave him half a block's start, then began to tail him. Again, it's more classic detective movie stuff, right? She's following him from a safe distance so as not to be seen. She followed him for hours along streets whose names she never knew, across arterials that even with the afternoon's lull nearly murdered her. Into slums and out, up long hillsides jammed solid with 2 or 3 bedroom houses. One by one, his sack of letters emptied. Eventually, he climbed on a Berkely bus. She followed them. She followed then. Halfway up Telegraph, the carrier got off and led her down the street to a pseudo-Mexican apartment house. Not once had he looked behind. Again, I have the double line. I don't know why that keeps happening. Not once had he looked behind him. John Nefastus lived here. She was back where she started. She couldn't believe 24 hours had passed. So her drift brought her back to the point of origin, which is, again, a big coincidence. She goes back to the hotel. The deaf-mute convention is partying. They're having a dance. She gets swept up by some grabby people who are, this is, by the way, did you guys notice that she's swept up into things a lot? She got swept up into the tour group that goes into the gay bar, right? That was, she just kind of like got caught in the crowd and swept along. Like it's almost like she's just sometimes a passive. For those of you who were with us for the Breakfast of Champions, sorry, not Breakfast of Champions, Slaughterhouse-Five, that's also the main character's thing, is that he experiences life as if he's just carried along by it. Like he almost doesn't have anything like free will. But Oedipa, I mean, she seems to, I don't know, it's maybe she's reached a point where her fate is decided. And so she gets swept along, right? Being swept along implies that there's a force doing the sweeping along, and therefore it's all sort of connected by that force. Anyway, she gets swept into the ballroom where they're all dancing. Now remember, this is a convention of deaf mute folks. That means they don't hear anything. They don't say anything. So what are they dancing to? Well, they're dancing to whatever is in their head. So here's this, again, like what should be complete chaos, right? Each couple on the floor danced to whatever was in the fellow's head. Tango, two-step, bossa nova, slop. But how long could they go on before collisions became a serious problem, hindrance? There would have to be collisions, right? Because there's not an actual band playing and everyone's just kind of doing what they want to do. The only alternative was some unthinkable order of music, many rhythms, all keys at once, the choreography in which each couple meshed easy, predestined, something they'd all heard with an extra sense atrophied in herself. So maybe they have some sense that she doesn't. She followed her partner's lead, limp in the young mute's clasp, waiting for the collisions to begin. But there are no collisions. She was danced. See, passive. She was danced, not active. That's a passive. Grammatically, that's a passive voice sentence. She was danced for half an hour by mysterious consensus, by mysterious agreement. Everybody took a break without having felt any touch but the touch of her partner. Jesus Arrabal would have called it an anarchist miracle. So that's the thing, see. It should be a chaotic situation, but there's some order behind it that she can't see, that she can't touch. She speculates that maybe these people do somehow touch on some other order that she can't understand. But that's her whole story, isn't it? Right? She's touching the tip of an iceberg, an order that she cannot understand. Oedipa, with no name for it, was only demoralized. She curtsied and fled. So again, she flees, she runs away. It's interesting that she's demoralized at the fact that things did not break down into chaos. I wonder why she's demoralized. Anybody? Why do you think she's demoralized by that? Yeah, go ahead, Basilia.
Because she doesn't succeed in what she wanted. She wanted to find her clues, but she didn't find anything. Dead end. It always is dead end.
I think that's true to some extent, but look at the sentence. Oedipa, with no name for it, was only demoralized. Maybe it's just that she had all dead ends. I kind of I don't know, I got the feeling that something about the fact that, because she expects things not to be connected. So when it turns out things are connected and that there's a mysterious order that she doesn't understand, then that could also mean that all of her paranoia is true, right? That there is something there. There is a face in the bush. I don't know. It could just be the dead ends, though. You're right. Next day, she goes to visit Hilarious. This is wild, this whole scene, hoping to be told that it's all in her head. So it's funny because she's almost in denial because she already said, hey, maybe the city will convince me that it's all in my head. But then the city's like, nope. So she's like, okay, I need a second opinion. I'll go to the doctor. Maybe the doctor will tell me it's all in my head. As she's walking towards the doctor's office, she's startled by an insect whirring loudly past her ear, followed at once by the sound of a gunshot. So, of course, the bullet is moving faster than the speed of sound. So it was not an insect that she heard. It was a bullet. After she heard another shot, she made the connection. Hilarious was shooting at people. Now, we don't know right away that it's Hilarious. I'm just saving a little bit of time by putting that up here. She makes the rest of her way to the office where Hilarious's assistant, Helga Blam, I don't know if this is the joke, Blam, like the sound of a gun going off, lets Oedipa into the office. He thinks someone's after him, she says. Tear streaks had meandered down her cheekbones. He's locked himself in the office with that rifle. A Gewehr 43 from the war, Oedipa recalled. He kept as a souvenir. From the war. So it turns out, okay, I don't want to skip ahead. He shot at me. Do you think anybody will report it? Well, he shot at half a dozen people. Somebody better report it. Oedipa noticed the window opened on a safe line of retreat. You could have run. The assistant, Helga, says he might have needed me, something like that. So think about this. Oedipa knows about that rifle. I thought about that too. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but like if you were going to a therapist, there are a couple of weird things. Would your therapist have a rifle like in their office? Maybe displayed on the wall? Perhaps. It's a little strange for a therapist. Or did he just tell her? I mean, we already know that he's weird from chapter 1. We already know that he's trying to get her to join his LSD experiment group. But she knows about the rifle that he kept as a souvenir from the war. So she knows he was in World War II, right? Daddy, what were you doing during the war? Kind of situation. Turns out to be quite it's funny because I imagine like, okay, maybe he just told her that he was in the war, but he just didn't mention what side he was on. Also, it's a German rifle. And if you go back and look at chapter 1, when she first talks to Hilarious, it says that he sounds like Mucho doing a Gestapo officer impression. So he has a German accent. Because remember when we first hear Mucho, he's doing all these voices on the phone, right? He's a funny guy. He does all these voices.
It was Pierce.
Oh, it was Pierce. You're right. That was a memory of Pierce. You're right. But still, yeah, it says, though, that Hilarious sounds like Pierce doing his Gestapo officer impression. Yeah, you're right. So apparently, I didn't remember it. I had to look back. But yeah, he has a German accent. So that made me think about their sessions even more. So he's a therapist with a stereotypical German accent, because you always kind of imagine this, tell me about your mother, sort of like picture, right? So he's got a German accent. He was in the war. She knows he was in the war. She knows about the rifle, so they're either close enough that he told her about it, or it's on display in his office. Anyway, like I said, maybe I'm overthinking it. She decides to talk to him, to try to talk him down, to talk him out of this madness. He screams to the door, "Who is it?" because he could hear her breathing or something. Mrs. Maas, may Speer and his ministry of cretins rot eternally in hell. Albert Speer was the architect of the Third Reich. So we're getting like this build up to, oh, wow, okay, he's actually a Nazi. Yes. Ex-Nazi, if you can ever really be. Do you realize half these rounds are duds? May I come in? Could we talk? I'm sure you'd like that, he said. I'm unarmed. You can frisk me, like you can check me for weapons. While you karate chop me in the spine, no thank you. It's funny. It's a funny scene. I like it. Why are you resisting every suggestion I make? Listen, have I seemed to you a good enough Freudian? Have I ever deviated seriously? So this is also his, I think I put it up in the next part. So as it turns out, he's an ex-Buchenwald concentration camp guard. He's afraid that the Israelis are after him to put him on trial. So he's locked himself in the office and he's shooting at people that he imagines are coming for him. In response to his question on whether he was a good Freudian, she says, you made faces now and then, but that's minor. So remember, he has faces that he makes that cure people of things. If you recall from chapter 1, he made a racist Chinese face and cured someone's hysterical blindness, apparently. I call it the Fu Manchu, he said. His response was a long, bitter laugh. I tried to submit myself to that man, to the ghost of that cantankerous Jew. So he sees in his mind as this is doing penance. Do you guys know what penance is? He sees this as a kind of way to punish and humble himself for his crimes, that he submitted himself to Freud instead of Jung. He's like, any normal German or Austrian would choose Jung naturally. So he's so he thinks that he doesn't deserve to be put on trial because he submitted himself to Freud. Tried to cultivate a faith in the literal truth of everything he wrote, even the idiocies and contradictions. It was the least I could have done. Nicht wahr? Right? A kind of penance. So that's his big concern, is that I was a good Freudian. I shouldn't be arrested. He yells at the police that there's a face that he can make. There's a face I can make, one you haven't seen. So his famous collection of faces. I've only made it once in my life, perhaps today in Central Europe. I've only made it once in my life, and perhaps today in Central Europe, there still lives in whatever vegetable ruin. So whoever saw the face is a vegetable. That means they're like in a coma or something. The young man who saw it. So he's made this face one time for one person. That person is in some vegetative state. He would be now about your age, hopelessly insane. His name was Zvi. Will you tell the police or whatever they're calling themselves tonight, because he thinks that they're Israeli agents, that I can make that face again? It has an effective radius of 100 yards. So this is a magical face that has a radius of 100 yards. It drives anyone unlucky enough to see it down forever into the darkened oubliette. So that's like the dungeon. Among the terrible shapes of the subconscious, I imagine. And secures the hatch irrevocably. So it drives you into the darkness, the darkest part of your mind, and locks you in forever. Thank you. He finishes. Thank you. This would play so well as a film, I think. I don't know if any of you saw Inherent Vice, which is an adaptation of Thomas Pynchon other novel, and I don't think it plays as a movie very well. That one, I don't know. It's up to you to judge. It's not a bad movie. It's just I don't know. So his he threatens the police with his deadly face-making skills. You think then that they're trying to bring you back to Israel to stand trial like they did Eichmann. The shrink kept nodding. Why? What did you do? Oh no, she says, why? What did you do at Buchenwald? He worked on experimentally induced insanity. So he tells the story that he's okay. We're not gonna like rank the crimes, but like he's one of the like doctors who worked on concentration camp prisoners, trying to make them insane. And there's a list of different things they did, like removing certain glands, like exposing them to different kinds of conditions and music and all kinds of weird stuff, sleep deprivation. So he's like the worst kind of person you could imagine. At one of, look, fierce competition, I imagine. um, and it's just remember, he's also heading up the LSD experiment in their neighborhood. I guess you just can't quit once you start doing experimentally induced insanity projects. I guess it's a lifelong endeavor. Once you start, you can't stop. So yeah, there's a lot we can talk about there that we'll probably talk about later on, because I mentioned that we could talk about some conspiracy stuff, but there's this Operation Paperclip thing where after World War II, a lot of Nazi officials were basically patriated into the US for technical reasons, like technical expertise and things like that. So he could be one of them, right? Something like that is certainly a way that we could look at this. I'm not sure if Pynchon was alluding to that Operation Paperclip. Could be. At some point, he puts the rifle on the table and she picks it up and points it at him. And she says, I ought to kill you. But he had wanted her to get the weapon. Isn't that what you've been sent to do? I'll stop doing the German accent. I guess it could be offensive to someone. He makes a face at her. He crosses and uncrosses his eyes. It sticks out his tongue. I guess that's a threat for him. It's kind of like if a martial artist puts up their hands. No, he moves his eyes around a little bit and sticks his tongue out. I came, she said, hoping you could talk me out of a fantasy. So his response to this is interesting, because remember, that's the whole reason that she came, was to hopefully be told that this is all in her head. And he does the exact opposite of that. He says, cherish the fantasy. What else do any of you have? Hold it tightly by its little tentacle. Don't let the Freudians coax it away from you. Aha, his faith in Freud is false. Don't let the Freudians coax it away from you, or the pharmacists poison it out of you. Whatever it is, hold it dear. When you lose it, you go over by that much to the others. You begin to cease to be. Huh. Life-affirming words from the concentration camp guard. I just picture his office, and he's even got the, the poster that says "Live, Laugh, Love," with this kind of drivel, motivational posters. Hold on to your dreams. Okay, enough laughing at that. As he's carted away, so they catch him, they surround him with. They're gonna put the straitjacket on him. They've got billy clubs. Oedipa's walking out, and she sees Mucho covering the story from a truck, like a radio truck. What a coincidence. She moseyed over past snapping flashbulbs and stuck her head in the window. Hi. Mucho's a bit different. Mucho's kind of changed somehow. She can't quite put her finger on it at first. He puts the mic in front of her. He says, "You're on, just be yourself." Then in his earnest broadcasting voice, he says, "How do you feel about this terrible thing?" "Terrible," she says. "Wonderful," he says. This is their radio broadcast. He had her go on to describe what happened. Thank you, Mrs. Edna Mosh. Edna Mosh. She wrapped up. He wrapped up. For your eyewitness accounts of this dramatic siege at hilarious psychiatric clinic. This is KCUF Mobile 2, sending it back now to Rabbit Warren at the studio. He cut the power. Edna Mosh, she says, it'll come out the right way later. Okay, remember the communication entropy thing? So he has, I don't know, a sense of it now, that he knows that after the microphone distortion and after the taping, it's going to sound right. He has developed a sort of sense that when she says it this way, it's going to sound the right way when it's finally broadcast. There's more to Mucho's new strangeness. Yeah, he says it'll come out the right way. That's already repeating what I said. It turns out that Mucho has decided to participate in the LSD experiments of Dr. Hilarious. Dr. Hilarious expanded it to local husbands. Local. They were just trying to get housewives before, but I guess they weren't getting enough. So Mucho has joined that group. That's why he's strange now. Oedipa runs into the guy from the beginning that Mucho always had a conflict with at his job, his program director, Caesar Funch. He says, I'm sure glad you're back. I couldn't remember her name. Oh, why is that? Frankly, since you left, Wendell hasn't been himself. And who, pray, has he been? Ringo Starr, Chubby Checker? These are all musicians. The Righteous Brothers? Has he been the Righteous Brothers, plural? And why tell me? All of the above, said Funch. Okay, so he hasn't been himself, but he's been a bunch of people. And it turns out that's exactly what he means, because Mucho has turned into a bunch of people because of the drugs. Oh, call me Edna, she says. Funch was whining. Behind his back, they're calling him Brother's N. He's losing his identity. How else can I put it? Day by day, Wendell is less himself and more generic. He enters a staff meeting and the room is suddenly full of people, you know? He's a walking assembly of man. So apparently Mucho is experiencing some kind of multiple personalities. I guess that's what it is, kind of, but not quite the same thing. I was trying to connect it to the previous scene where Hilarious tells her that you cease to become who you are as soon as you let go of your delusions. Well, it seems like Mucho is really doubled down on them and he's losing himself. Anyway, Mucho has also developed fantastic hearing. It's extraordinary. Everything's been, wait, listen. She heard nothing unusual. There are 17 violins on that cut. There's some background music playing. He said, and one of them, I can't tell where he was because it's monaural here. Damn. It dawned on her he was talking about the muzak. Muzak spelled like that means like background music that's played in elevators and in stores, furniture, like music you're not really supposed to hear. It has been seeping in its subliminal, unidentifiable way since they'd entered the place. All strings, reeds, muted brass. What is it? She said. His E string. It's a few cycles sharp. So he hears all these violins and he can pick out one guy, one string on one violin. So he does indeed seem to have superhuman hearing now. He says, I can break down chords and timbres and words too, into all the basic frequencies and harmonics. with all the different loudnesses, and listen to them, each pure tone, but all at once. He seems to, I don't know. Does anybody have anything to say about this? Because one thing I was thinking about here is that he is preventing entropy somehow. Like he's able to hear everything in its pure form. So there's not one of those layers. Like remember where I said what you heard or what is heard is not what is said. Well, for him it is, maybe. I don't know. That's my theory anyway. How can you do that? He says, it's like I have a separate channel for each one. So for each sound, he has a separate channel. And if I need more, I just expand. So he can just add more channels. He's like a big mixing board. Add on what I need. I don't know how it works, but lately I can do it with people talking too. Say, rich chocolatey goodness. He asks her to say, rich chocolatey goodness. And she does. Rich chocolatey goodness, she says. That's funny because it's like a commercial. All the voices at once, the same, saying the same thing. I forgot what this yes is attached to. I must have failed to grab a piece of the text. He's thinking about how she said that, and he falls silent. Well, what? He says, I noticed it the other night hearing Rabbit do a commercial. Rabbit is like his other broadcaster, his colleague. No matter who's talking, the different power spectra are the same, give or take a small percentage. So you and Rabbit have something in common now. So even when Rabbit says rich chocolatey goodness, more than that, everybody who says the same words is the same person. If the spectra are the same, only they happen differently in time. You dig? You dig is a really hippie thing to say. But the time is arbitrary. So people are the same when they say the same things. Could this be criticism of consumer culture? Rich chocolatey goodness. People are the same when they say the same things. I don't know. Kind of my running theory so far. You pick your 0 point anywhere you want. That way you can shuffle each person's timeline sideways till they all coincide. Then you'd have this big God, maybe a couple 100 million chorus saying rich chocolatey goodness together, and it would all be the same voice. Mucho, she said. Is that what Funch means when he says you're coming on like a whole room full of people? Whenever I put the headset on now, he continued, I really do understand what I find there. Remember before he didn't believe in his job, and I was kind of wondering what that could possibly mean, that he would have such reservations about being a DJ. Not like it's an ignoble profession, especially a radio DJ in the 60s. When those kids sing about she loves you, yeah, well, you know she does. She's any number of people all over the world. Okay, no, that's cool. That actually makes sense. You know, it's not any particular she or any particular you, right? When you hear that song, anybody should hear that song and know that it's kind of about them, right? Even if they've never met the Beatles. This, of course, is a reference to the Beatles song. So yeah, she's any number of people all over the world, back through time, different colors, sizes, ages, shapes, distances from death, but she loves. And the you is everybody and herself. Oedipa, the human voice, you know, it's a flippin' miracle. His eyes brimming, he's getting teary-eyed, reflecting the color of beer. Baby, she said. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know what to say to him. He put a little clear plastic bottle on the table between them. She stared at the pills in it and then understood. That's LSD, she said. Mucho smiled back. So this is where she finds out about the project that he's joined. or at least maybe. No end to it, baby. You're an antenna, sending your pattern out across a million lives a night. And they're your lives too. He had this patient, motherly look now. She wanted to punch him in the mouth. Yeah. I don't know, like the popular representations of hippies in cultural products like movies and television shows tend to, I don't know, tend to put forward a kind of annoying person who has either an air of cosmic superiority or infuriating detachment from their surroundings, right? She's like, oh, God. More on that later, but I mean, I think that there's kind of a stereotype hippie that really comes through in this. But this is not just a hippie. This is somebody who's like deeply drug-addled brain is going through a lot. The police told her to stay, but she says, you know, they always do that for an investigation. Just in case we need to talk to you, stay in town. You're going back to San Narciso? Tonight, yes. But the cops, I'll be a fugitive. So she's going to go ahead and just leave to go back to continue her quest. Later, she couldn't remember if they'd said anything else. At the station, they kissed goodbye, all of them. So she's referring to all of the muchos. When I first read that, I thought she was talking about kissing all the cops goodbye. I'm like, that's weird. San Francisco. No, she means all of the mucho, all of the muchos. See, he really is Mucho Mas, isn't he? He's really grown into that name because he's much more. He's a lot of people now. As he walked away, he was whistling something complicated. 12 tone. Wow, so he can even whistle in chords. Oedipa sat with her forehead resting on the steering wheel and remembered that she hadn't asked him about the Tristero cancellation on his letter. That was something she had meant to ask him because at some point she implies that maybe he's involved because of that letter that she got. Maybe he sent it through the waste system because it had the misprint, remember? But by then it was too late to make any difference. And that's the end of chapter 5. So the entropy thing, it's making more sense to me now, but I still have to think about it. If there are any more technically minded people than myself, I would say you can look at those proofs. And maybe, I don't know. I'm not a mathy person. I'm more of a wordsy person. But I get it. Especially get it in communication entropy. Yeah. It's great though because the book really pushes you off in lots of different directions, and I wind up thinking about stuff all week. Sometimes to my detriment.
Can I say something about
Mm-hmm.
Entropy?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I found some physician, Arthur Eddington, said, if you try to go against the second law of thermodynamic, I can give you no hope. There is nothing but for your theory to collapse and in deepest humiliation.
Yeah, that's exactly why patent applications are no longer accepted for perpetual motion machines because
I can explain, I think I can explain why he said that.
okay.
Because the first law of thermodynamic can be said as we can get nothing from something from nothing.
Right.
So it's about conservation of energy.
Yes.
But the second law of thermodynamic is we can't get something for nothing.
Yeah.
And this is about entropy.
Yeah, I understand that part. I'm just trying to crystallize my picture of because okay, the Maxwell's demon thing is apparently a real theoretical, like it's a thought experiment. And as I said before, a lot of times if you go back to a certain period, uh, thought experiments are done with a quote unquote demon, right? So like imagine that there was something that could break the laws of, in this case, thermodynamics. But yeah.
The first when the first type of machine that has perpetual motion break the first law of thermodynamic, and this machine is working, making some work without energy. But the second law breaks the second type of perpetual motion machine, and this machine use thermal energy for mechanical work, but spontaneously. And if this machine exists, if some demon make this machine, it will use all thermal energy with the time, and the world with rest without energy. So this is not a good idea to make such a machine.
Well, I guess that's the other reason that they don't accept patents for them anymore. Don't want to end the world. Yes,
Yeah.
Slobodanka? You have your hand raised?
Well, while reading this chapter, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Can
Yeah,
you hear me? Because
I hear you, yes.
Unfortunately, while reading this
it seems
countering
like
the situation where Oedipa cannot distinguish reality and illusion or the world that is imaginary.
Right.
Mark Twain, if it's okay with you, can I read it? It's a very short one. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit, so I hear you sometimes.
Is it okay for you? Is it okay for me to read?
Yes,
this,
yes, of course.
Quote by Mark Twain. Okay, let me go to the other room because I'm closer to the computer. Maybe it will be better.
Maybe it's
okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that is. It might be better. So it goes like this: nothing exists. All is a dream. God, man, the world, the sun, the moon, the wilderness of the stars. A dream. All a dream. They have no existence. Nothing exists save empty space and you. And you are not you. You have no body, no blood, no bones. You are but a thought. Well, I think it tells me that the idea of Pynchon and the idea of Mark Twain were, well, a bit similar.
Sure, but I think so. That view is sometimes called solipsism. Solipsism is the belief that there's nothing but yourself, and it would, result in the ultimate self-centeredness of a person. I think that I don't think that that's what Pynchon believes. I think that's what the character is going through this. And I don't think it's that she's trying to figure out whether other people exist. She's trying to figure out whether it's all chaos and disconnected and coincidence, or it's all connected and meaningful.
But she is having problems grasping the reality, hasn't she?
Well, yes. She has a hard time figuring out what's going on, but that's not the same thing. That's not necessarily the same thing as wondering
it's
whether.
not the same thing, but I don't know. Somehow it's brought to my mind that quote. That's all.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that certainly would be one solution to her her situation. It's all a dream. Uh, that's a trope from different stories, you know, movies and stuff, where the person wakes up at the end and it was all a dream. I mean, nowadays that's considered a very cheap move at the end of the story to do that. Yeah, yeah. She's gonna find out when. Actually, no, I don't think she's going to find out. And again, I haven't read the last story. I don't think she's going to get to the end of the mystery, because I think that he's more likely going to want us to have something to chew on, right? We're not going to get the final answer because you don't in life. You don't get this neatly wrapped end of all mysteries, right?
You never do. You never do,
Never
really.
do. And why would you want to?
Right. You're right.
You know, questions are much more fun than answers,
You're right.
in my humble opinion. And you'll never live up to the answer will never live up to the fantasized answer. You know.
That's right. And in fact, she received a very good advice from Dr. Hilarious. It's a very good advice.
That's so. It's yeah. It's very subversive. That
as mad as he is.
Yeah, the man that he is.
He gave her good advice.
I thought it's dark humor. You know, it's dark humor. They want us to say, oh, like this ex-Nazi has inspiring things to say to you.
But he's right. He's right, really.
Yeah,
we cannot give up on our fantasies. No way. Otherwise, we're lost.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, also about subversiveness, like this whole the contrast to a like quote unquote regular detective story is that the detective is, as they describe sometimes in those novels, hard-nosed, right? He's got a powerful cynicism where he doesn't trust anyone, and he has rigorous methods that he uses to get information. But Oedipa is the complete inverse. She's not hard-nosed. She's not rigorous and systematic. She literally wanders around the city waiting for something to be revealed to her, like some kind of mystic. And again, that's did anybody have a chance to see the I Heart Huckabees?
No.
That thing I talked about last week. There's an aspect of this to that, you know, like the idea of someone investigating coincidences, which is what she's pretty much doing. By the way, it's Dustin Hoffman in that movie. He's one of the investigators of coincidences. Basically, in that story, if you have a coincidence that you can't get out of your head, you go to this agency and you pay these people, and they'll figure out what it's all about. But they need to know all about your childhood and everything about you, and they'll follow you around, and they take pictures of you while you're sleeping, and they dig through your trash, and they follow you down the street like 20 feet behind you all the time. And you have a case file with them, and they're like, we're almost there. We're going to get to the bottom of this big coincidence that's been bothering you.
But then again, Carl Jung is a great proponent of coincidences. So
sure.
Well, they make sense sometimes, or very often, or always. I don't know.
Yeah, Carl Jung was just trying to reincorporate religion into psychoanalysis because he realized that human beings can't just go without it completely. I mean, put it short.
But you must have encountered yourself. You must have encountered many coincidences in life. I'm sure of that. As did everyone else.
No, actually, it's been happening a lot lately because of the book. like things keep happening to me, and I'm like, this is driving me crazy. Why is this happening now?
Aware of them. You're more aware of them. That's all.
That's absolutely it. It is. It is absolutely it. The thing that I said at the beginning that, you know, how you don't see what happened and all that, the guy who said that, Robert Anton Wilson, has a whole book on coincidences. It's called Coincidence. And it's exactly about that. Like, yeah, you become aware of things. You're actually the one who connects things. Like, simultaneity is really, if you think about it on a purely, like if you get to the most basic material level, it's really hard to put your finger on what simultaneity means, because where an event begins and ends in time is actually not so rigidly defined, right? It's like really hard to put your finger on when a thing really happened. So there's a period of time in your perception that you count as when a thing happened. And so you're the one who kind of draws the connections between things. So in a way, you make the coincidence. Like if you say, oh, these two
Well,
things happened at the
yes
same
and no.
time.
Yes and no. Both
Yeah,
yes and no.
right. Exactly. It just depends on how you look at it.
Yes. Okay.
Somewhere at this very moment, 10,000 miles from here, a man touches a pig. Right as I say this. Coincidence?
Well,
I think not.
I did not mean it in that way. You know that.
Okay. Anybody else have anything?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All righty. Well, in that case, we're going to go ahead and stop for now. I know this one was a little bit longer than normal. It was, I think that's the longest chapter in the book. A lot to talk about. And yeah, just I want to remind you, if there's something in particular you want to put up on the screen, because we skip so much, just let me know, send me an email, and I'll put it in the slideshow. Okay.
Okay.
Well, if that's all, then I will see you guys next Sunday for the final chapter. And there will be one more week after that where we have just a general kind of talk about concepts and things, anything we'd like to talk about, really. All right. Hello, person behind Yelena. Someone's sneaking up on you, Yelena. Look out. Okay. I'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
bye.